Away in the manger, no crib for a bed, the little Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head. The stars in the bright sky looked down where he lay, the little Lord Jesus asleep on the hay.
Hello and welcome to our 12th day before Christmas. That means tomorrow is Christmas Day and tonight is Christmas Eve. And because of that, we have some lovely stories and poems for you. As was true yesterday, the audio of which, if you haven't listened yet, you can get at CraftLit.com or at youtube.com/craftlit-channel. Yesterday I mentioned that we were in kind of an interesting situation with our public domain literature in that we couldn't get a whole lot of information on some of our authors. That's holding true with our texts for today, except for one notable person. But our lineup for today, just so you have it, begins with the poem called The Night After Christmas by Anne P.L. Field. Then we have a very special piece called A Letter from Santa Claus by Samuel Clemens, who we also know as Mark Twain. It is a lovely little letter to his daughter. Then a short story by James Weber Lynn, who wrote a biography, and that appears to be the only other thing he wrote that's been remembered, aside from this short story called The Philanthropist's Christmas that was written in 1913. And then we will finish with 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, read by our very dear Jon Scholes, who passed away this year. Now, Clement Clark Moore, who is supposed to have written 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, he's a very interesting person on his own. He was born in 1779. He died in 1863 and evidently wrote 'Twas the Night Before Christmas somewhere around 1823, 1824. There had been some discussion by some friends of the family, friends of the Livingston family, that Moore wasn't in fact responsible for writing this poem. However, no other person alive at the time had claimed authorship. So when Moore finally said, yes, that was me, and published a little book of poetry, no one at the time stepped forward and said, hey, wait a minute, I wrote that. So people are pretty convinced that he really did write this. But one of the reasons why he published it anonymously originally is because he was a professor of classical Greek literature and things like that, and he didn't really think it was such a great idea to associate himself with something so light. And not only was he a very respected professor, but he was also an extraordinary landholder in Manhattan. This is when the city of Manhattan pretty much stopped at Houston Street. And, everything north was wilderness, which is so hard to imagine now. But he had property from his family, his wife, who was a Van Cortlandt, distant relative, but still part of the Van Cortlandt family that owned, I think, pretty much everything north of Manhattan proper. So like the Bronx all the way up to Croton. She came with property. And so they combined, had a lot of property. And most of that property is now what we call Chelsea. He started to subdivide his land after 9th Avenue was driven through part of his estate. And at first he was really ticked off and called it, a new form of tyranny and all that. And then he realized, wow, I could make a lot of money subdividing this and making really nice townhouses for people. And that's what happened. So Clement Clark Moore, more than just A Night Before Christmas, kind of an interesting guy. But that is neither here nor there, because today we need to get cracking and start listening. So here you go with our selections for our last day in our 12 days before Christmas. May your Christmas be merry, bright, full of love, and full of great books. We'll see you in 2016 for The Count of Monte Cristo at CraftLit.com.
The Night After Christmas by Anne P.L. Field. Recording by Jan McGillivray. 'Twas the night after Christmas in Santa Claus land, and to rest from his labors St. Nicholas planned. The reindeer were turned out to pasture, and all the 10,000 assistants discharged till the fall. The furry greatcoat was laid safely away, with the boots and the cap with its tassel so gay, and toasting his toes by a merry wood fire, what more could a weary old Santa desire? So he puffed at his pipe, and remarked to his wife, "This amply makes up for my strenuous life. From climbing down chimneys my legs fairly ache, but it's well worth the while for the dear children's sake. I'd bruise every bone in my body to see the darlings delight in a gift-laden tree." Just then came a sound like a telephone bell, though why they should have such a thing I can't tell. St. Nick gave a snort and exclaimed in a rage, "Bad luck to inventions of this modern age." He grabbed the receiver. His face wore a frown as he roared in the mouthpiece, "I will not come down to exchange any toys like an up-to-date store. Ring off. I'll not listen to anything more." Then he settled himself by the comforting blaze and waxed reminiscent of halcyon days when children were happy with simplest of toys, a doll for the girls and a drum for the boys. But again came that noisy disturber of peace, the telephone bell. Would the sound never cease? "Run and answer it, wife. All my patience has fled. If they keep this thing up I shall wish I were dead. I have worked night and day the best part of a year to supply all the children, and what do I hear? A boy who declares he received roller skates when he wanted a gun, and a cross girl who states that she asked for a new Victor talking machine, and I brought her a sled so she thinks I am mean." Poor St. Nicholas looked just the picture of woe. He needed some auto-suggestion, you know, to make him think things were all coming out right, for he didn't get one wink of slumber that night. The telephone wire was kept sizzling hot by children disgusted with presents they'd got, and when the bright sun showed its face in the sky, the Santa Claus family were ready to cry. Just then something happened, a way of escape, though it came in the funniest possible shape. An aeronaut, sorely in need of a meal, descended for breakfast. It seemed quite ideal. For the end of it was, he invited his host out to try the balloon, of whose speed he could boast. St. Nick, who was nothing if not a good sport, was delighted to go, and as quick as a thought climbed into the car for a flight in the air. "No telephone bells can disturb me up there. And wife, if it suits me I'll count it no crime to stay up till ready for next Christmas time." Thus saying, he sailed in the giant balloon, and I fear that he will not return very soon. Now, when you ask Central for Santa Claus land, she'll say, "Discontinued," and you'll understand. End of The Night After Christmas by Anne P.L. Field.
Fireside Christmas Short Stories. Her Birthday Dream by Nellie C. King. Recording by Angela. Marcia Brownlow came out of the church and walked rapidly down the street. She seemed perturbed. Her gray eyes flashed, and on her cheeks glowed 2 red spots. She was glad she was not going home so she wouldn't have to take a car, but could walk the short distance to Aunt Sophie's, where she had been invited to dine and visit with her special chum, Cousin Jack, who was home from college for the short Thanksgiving vacation. She slowed up as she reached her destination and waited a little before going in. She wanted to get calmed down a bit, for she didn't want her friend to see her when she felt so riled up. Back of it was a secret reluctance to meet Jack. He was so different since the Gypsy Smith revival. Of course, he was perfectly lovely and unchanged toward her, but somehow she felt uncomfortable in his presence, and she didn't enjoy having her self-satisfaction disturbed. As she entered the dining room, she was greeted with exclamations of surprise and pleasure. "Why, Marcia," said Aunt Sophia, "we had given you up. I almost never knew of your being late in keeping an appointment." "You must excuse me, Auntie, and lay this offense to the charge of our Sunday school superintendent," answered Marcia.
"I suppose Mr. Robinson is laying his plans for Christmas," remarked Uncle John.
He believes in taking time by the forelock, and a very commendable habit it is, too." "Yes," answered Marcia laconically. Jack glanced at her keenly. "Is there anything new in the Christmas line?" he asked. The gray eyes grew black, and the red spots burned again as Marcia replied, "Well, I should think so. He proposes to turn things topsy-turvy." "My, what does he want to do?" inquired Cousin Augusta. "Oh, he calls it the White Gift Christmas, but the long and short of the matter is that he proposes to turn down Santa Claus and all the old time-honored customs connected with Christmas that are so dear to the hearts of the children, and have the school do the giving. He has a big banner hung up in the Sunday school room bearing the words, 'Gifts for the Christ Child.'" "An excellent idea," exclaimed Uncle John, "but I don't see much of an innovation about that. You have always made the children's giving a part of your Christmas celebration, have you not?" "Certainly," rejoined Marcia. "They have always brought their little gifts for the poor, and that is all right, but this time there are no gifts to the Sunday school at all." "Not even to the primary school?" asked Augusta. "Well," admitted Marcia, "Mr. Robinson gave the children their choice today, whether they would have the old Christmas or the White Gift Christmas, and they all voted for the new idea." "Why then should the children be obliged to have gifts if they don't want them?" laughed Augusta. "Oh, children are always taken with novelty, and Mr. Robinson told it to them in such a way that fancy was captivated, but I don't think they really understood what they were giving up." "Marcia, it seems to me that you are emphasizing the wrong side of the subject, if I understand it aright," said Jack. "Why, do you know about it?" asked Marcia in surprise. "Not much," replied Jack, "but I've read the White Gift story in the Sunday School Times, and the report of the Painesville experiment." "Well, Jack, tell us what you know about this mysterious white gift," commanded his father. "I would rather Marcia should tell it, father. I know so little." "Oh, go on, Jack," urged Marcia. "You can't possibly know less about it than I do, for I confess I was so full of the disappointment of the little ones that the other side of it didn't impress me very much." "Well, as I remember it," said Jack, "the gist of the plan is this, that Christmas is Christ's birthday, and we should make our gifts to him instead of to one another. And the idea of the white gift was suggested by the story of the Persian king named Kublai Khan, who was a wise and good ruler, and greatly beloved. On his birthday his subjects kept what they called the White Feast. This was celebrated in an immense great white banqueting hall, and each one of his subjects brought to their king a white gift to express that the love and loyalty of their hearts was without stain. The rich brought white chargers, ivory, and alabaster, the poor brought white pigeons, or even a measure of rice, and the great king regarded all gifts alike so long as they were white. Have I told it right, cousin?" queried Jack. "Yes, I think so. It is a beautiful thought, I must confess, and might be all right in a large, rich Sunday school, but in a mission school like ours I am sure it will be a failure. It will end in our losing our scholars. I don't believe in taking up new ideas without considering whether they are adapted to our needs or not, but please, dear folkses, don't let us say anything more about it," pleaded Marcia, and so the subject was dropped. That evening, as Jack Thornton bade his cousin good-bye, he placed in her hand a little package, saying, "I'm so sorry, Marcia, that I can't be here for your birthday, but here's my remembrance. Now don't you dare open it before Tuesday, and, dear, you may be sure it is a white gift, and may you have a white birthday." And before she could say a word, he had opened the door and was gone. Touched by his thoughtful gift and his words, she said to herself, "A white birthday! I always have perfectly beautiful birthdays." And so she did, for she was always looking out for other people's birthdays and making much of them, and so she always got the gospel measure. "Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over, shall man give into your bosom." But these thoughts were crowded out by the pressure of things to be done. Father and mother had gone into the country to visit a sick friend, and the younger brothers and sisters surrounded her and clamored for songs and Bible stories, and as she was a good older sister, she devoted herself to them until their bedtime. Then, turning out the lights, she sat down in an easy-chair before the library grate, and yielded herself to the spell of the quiet hour. The strained, irritated nerves relaxed, and a strange, sweet peace stole over her. As she gazed dreamily into the fire, a star seemed to rise out of the glowing coals and beam at her with a beautiful, soft radiance, and the words of the Evangel came into her mind. "And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding joy, and when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him, and when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh." She repeated the words over and over to herself. How simple and restful they were! How direct and genuine and satisfying was this old-time giving! There it was, gifts for the Christ child. They presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. She remembered reading somewhere that the gold represented our earthly possessions, the frankincense typified our service, and the myrrh our suffering for his sake." As she gazed into the fire and mused, she fell asleep, and all these thoughts were woven into the fabric of a dream. And who shall say that God does not speak to his children still in dreams? She dreamed that it was the morning of her birthday. She heard cheery voices in the hall calling out to one another, "This is Marcia's birthday! Wish you many returns of the day!" There was an excited running to and fro between the different rooms and gleeful exclamations, but no one came near her. She sat up in bed listening and wondering what it could mean. Why, Mother always came into her room and folded her to her heart and said those precious things that only a mother can say, and the children always scrambled to see who should be the first to give Sister a birthday kiss. Were they playing some joke on her? She would be quiet and watch, and so not be taken unawares. Presently they went trooping happily downstairs into the dining room, and she heard Father's voice say, "Good morning, children. I wish you many happy returns of Marcia's birthday." What did it all mean? Was she going crazy? Or were they just trying to surprise her by some novel way of celebrating her birthday? She arose and with trembling fingers dressed herself hastily and stole softly down the stairs and looked into the dining room. Hush, Father was asking a blessing. He returned thanks for dear Marcia's birthday and asked that it should be a happy day for them all. Beside each plate save her own were various packages, and these were opened amid ejaculations of surprise and pleasure, and sundry hugs and kisses. After the first burst of happiness had subsided, Marcia braced herself and entered the dining room, saying with forced gaiety, "Good morning, dear ones all." They looked up with blank, unanswering faces and said, "Good morning, Marcia." That was all. But Marcia's heart leaped at the recognition of her presence, for she had begun to fear that she was dead and that it was her spirit that was wandering about. She stooped and kissed her mother, who murmured abstractedly, "Yes, dear," never once looking up from the presents she was examining. With a sinking heart, she turned away from her mother and went and stood behind her father's chair, and leaning over, whispered in his ear, "Dear father, have you forgotten that this is my birthday?" He answered kindly but absent-mindedly, "Why, daughter, am I likely to forget it with all these tokens around me?" And he waved his hand toward the gifts piled around his plate. This was almost more than Marcia could bear, for father was always specially tender and attentive to her on her birthday. She always sat on his knee a while, and he told her what a joy and comfort she was to him, and he always paid her some pretty compliment that made her girlish heart swell with innocent pride, for every girl knows that compliments from one's father are a little sweeter than any others. In vain she hung around, waiting for some clue to this mysterious, unnatural conduct of the family. They were all absorbed in plans for spending this birthday, Marcia's birthday, but no reference whatever was made to what she liked. No one consulted her as to what she wanted to do or to have done. The boys were going skating in the forenoon, the little girls were to invite 4 of their friends to help serve the first dinner in the new doll's house, and in the afternoon father would take them all for an automobile ride into the country to a dear friend's, all but Marcia, who couldn't bear to get into an auto since a terrible accident she had been in a few weeks ago. A troop of her girl friends came in and in a conventional way wished her many happy returns of the day, and then proceeded to ignore her, and gave gifts to other members of the family. "It is a wonder," thought Marcia bitterly, "that they didn't have a birthday party for Marcia with Marcia left out." And so it went on all through that strange, miserable day. While they were all busy celebrating her birthday, she herself was neglected and ignored. As she sat in the quiet house alone in the twilight, for she had no heart to light the gas, just homesick for the personal love which had characterized all her birthdays and all her home life heretofore, there came a timid knock on the door, and as Marcia opened it, there stood little crippled Joe, one of her scholars in the Mission Sunday School. As he saw her, he gave a little exclamation of surprise and delight and said, "Oh, Miss Marcy, I hearn last night 'twas your birthday today, and I wanted to guv yer something white, like Mr. Robinson he told us about, don't yer know? And 'cause yer has allus treated me so white, and I didn't have nothin', and so I axed him, what yer telled us about in Sunday school, Jesus, who died on the cross, and who's allers willin' to help a poor fella, and I axed him to help me get something real nice and white for your birthday, and I kept me eyes peeled all day expectin' it, and just now a real swell feller buyed a paper of me, and then he guv me this here bunch of white sweet-smellin' posies thout my sayin' a word. Here they be, Miss Marcy, for your Jiminy, teacher, ain't them purty? And teacher, he made 'em in the fust place, and had the man guv 'em to me, and so I reckon he and me's partners in this here white gift business." And he held up in his thin, grimy hand a bunch of white, sweet-scented violets. Marcia's first impulse was to catch up the little fellow and his gift in her arms and baptize them with a flood of tears from her own overcharged heart. But she hadn't taught boys in a Mission Sunday School class for nothing. Joe would have thought she had gone crazy, or been struck silly, or was sick unto death. So she controlled herself, and kneeling beside him, took the violets reverently in both her hands, saying in a choked voice, "Joe, they are just beautiful. This is the only really truly white gift I have had today, and I don't deserve it, but I thank him and you." The boy looked at her with shining face, drew his hand across his eyes, and then answered brightly, "Oh, that's all right, Miss Marshy. 'Tenny right 'tis with me, and I reckon 'tis with him." And seizing his crutch, he hopped like a little sparrow through the door and onto the street, and she heard his boyish voice calling out, "Evening papers, last edition, all about the big graft exposure." Just then the big white touring car discharged its merry load at the door, and the house was filled with the chatter and laughter of the children. In vain she tried to find a quiet corner where she could be alone with her heart. It was impossible to escape from the hilarious celebration of her birthday. She was so glad when the children said good night and went off to bed, and she could seek the quiet of her own room. As she bade her father good night, he said, "Well, daughter, I hope you have enjoyed your birthday and all your gifts." At this, all the honesty of her nature, all the hatred of sham, rose up in one indignant outburst, and she exclaimed, "I have had no gifts, neither has this been my birthday celebration." "Why, Marcia," said her father in an aggrieved tone, "this certainly is your birthday, and we have been very happy in keeping it for love of you." "I have failed to see any manifestation of love to me," retorted Marcia. "You may have had a happy time, but I have not been in it. You have given gifts to one another, but I have had just one," and she held up the bunch of violets. "This is a gift of love from little lame Joe in answer to his prayer and in pity for my hungry heart." There was silence in the room for a moment, and then her father answered, "It seems to me, daughter, that when you get right down to a personal application, what you believe in after all is a white birthday." The words went through her like an electric shock, and with a start she awoke and sat upright in her chair, and lo, it was all a dream. Marcia looked around the room, shook herself a little, stirred the fire, and put on fresh coal. She laughed at the remembrance of her dream and its absurdity. How glad she was that it was only a dream. But was it only a dream? Was it not a reality? Was not this the way she had kept the Lord's birthday? When she had opened her Christmas treasure, how much had been given him, and for love of him? How large a place had she given him in the season's activity? Had she ever made room for him as the central figure of it all, or had he been crowded out, and his rightful place given to Santa Claus and the world's merrymaking? In the light of the Spirit she saw that the Star of Bethlehem always leads to the cross of Calvary. She had never liked to think about the cross before, but now it was all illumined with the glory of the love which gave to us God's best, his only begotten Son. She remembered how the Lord Jesus had said, "If I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me." She saw that it is as we see Christ on the cross for us that we are drawn to him. In that still hour, on her knees at the foot of the cross, Marcia, with great gladness, made her first white gift unto her Lord. She gave herself to him. End of Her Birthday Dream by Nellie C. King.
Palace of St. Nicholas, in the moon, Christmas morning. My dear Susie Clemens, I have received and read all the letters which you and your little sister have written me by the hand of your mother and your nurses. I have also read those which you little people have written me with your own hands. For although you did not use any characters that are in grown people's alphabet, you used the characters that all children in all lands on earth and in the twinkling stars use. And as all my subjects in the moon are children, and use no characters but that, you will easily understand that I can read your and your baby sister's jagged and fantastic marks without any trouble at all. But I had trouble with those letters which you dictated through your mother and the nurses, for I am a foreigner and cannot read English writing well. You will find that I made no mistakes about the things which you and the baby ordered in your own letters. I went down your chimney at midnight when you were asleep and delivered them all myself, and kissed both of you too, because you are good children, well-trained, nice-mannered, and about the most obedient little people I ever saw. But in the letter which you dictated there were some words which I could not make out for certain, and one or two small orders which I could not fill because we ran out of stock. Our last lot of kitchen furniture for dolls has just gone to a very poor little child in the North Star way up in the cold country above the Big Dipper. Your mamma can show you that star, and you will say Little Snowflake, for that is the child's name. I'm glad you got that furniture, for you need it more than I. That is, you must write that with your own hand, and Snowflake will write you an answer. If you only spoke it, she wouldn't hear you. Make your letter light and thin, for the distance is great and the postage very heavy. Now, there was a word or two in your mamma's letter which I couldn't be certain of. I took it to be a trunk full of doll's clothes. Is that it? I will call at your kitchen door about 9 o'clock this morning to inquire. But I must not see anybody, and I must not speak to anybody but you. When the kitchen doorbell rings, George must be blindfolded and sent to open the door. Then he must go back to the dining room or the china closet and take the cook with him. You must tell George he must walk on tiptoe and not speak. Otherwise he will die some day. Then you must go up to the nursery and stand on a chair or the nurse's bed and put your ear to the speaking tube that leads down to the kitchen. And when I whistle through it, you must speak in the tube and say, "Welcome, Santa Claus." Now then I will ask whether it was a trunk you ordered or not. If you say it was, I shall ask you what color you want the trunk to be. Your mamma will help you to name a nice color, and then you must tell me every single thing in detail which you want the trunk to contain. And then when I say goodbye and Merry Christmas to my little Susie Clemens, you must say goodbye, good old Santa Claus. I thank you very much, and please tell that little snowflake I will look at her star tonight, and she must look down here. I'll be right in the West Bay window, and every fine night I will look out at her star and say, I know somebody up there and like her too. Then you must go down into the library and make George close all the doors that open into the main hall, and everybody must keep still for a little while. I will go to the moon and get those things, and in a few minutes I'll come down the chimney that belongs to the fireplace that is in the hall. If it is a trunk you want, because I couldn't get such a thing as a trunk down the nursery chimney, you know. Now, people may talk if they want until they hear my footsteps in the hall. Then you tell them to keep quiet a little while till I go back up the chimney. Maybe you will not hear my footsteps at all, so you may go now and then and peep through the dining room doors, and by you will see that thing which you want right under the piano in the drawing room, for I shall put it there. If I should leave any snow in the hall, you must tell George to sweep it into the fireplace, for I haven't time to do such things. George must not use a broom but a rag, else he will die some day. You must watch George and not let him run into danger. If my boot should leave a stain on the marble, George must not hollystone it away. Leave it there always, in memory of my visit. And whenever you look at it or show it to anybody, you must let it remind you to be a good little girl. Whenever you are naughty and somebody points to that mark which your good old Santa Claus's boot made on the marble, what will you say, little sweetheart? Well, goodbye for a few minutes till I come down to the world and ring the kitchen doorbell. Your loving Santa Claus, whom people sometimes call the Man in the Moon.
Children's Book of Christmas Stories, The Philanthropist's Christmas by James Weber Lynn. Did you see this committee yesterday, Mr. Matthews? Asked the philanthropist. His secretary looked up. Yes, sir. You recommend them, then? Yes, sir. For 50,000. For 50,000, yes, sir. Their corresponding subscriptions are guaranteed? I went over the list carefully, Mr. Carter. The money is promised and by responsible people. Very well, said the philanthropist. You may notify them, Mr. Matthews, that my 50,000 will be available as the bills come in. Yes, sir. Old Mr. Carter laid down the letter he had been reading and took up another. As he perused it, his white eyebrows rose in irritation. Mr. Matthews, he snapped. Yes, sir. You are careless, sir. I beg your pardon, Mr. Carter? Questioned the secretary, his face flushing. The old gentleman tapped impatiently the letter he held in his hand. Do you pay no attention, Mr. Matthews, to my rule that no personal letters containing appeals for aid are to reach me? How do you account for this, may I ask? I beg your pardon, said the secretary again. You will see, Mr. Carter, that this letter is dated 3 weeks ago. I have had the woman's case carefully investigated. She is undoubtedly of good reputation and undoubtedly in need, and as she speaks of her father as having associated with you, I thought perhaps you would care to see her letter." "1,000 worthless fellows associated with me," said the old man harshly. "In a great factory, Mr. Matthews, a boy works alongside of men he is put with. He does not pick and choose. I dare say this woman is telling the truth. What of it? You know that I regard my money as a public trust. Were my energy, my concentration, to be wasted by innumerable individual assaults, what would become of them? My fortune would slip through my fingers as unprofitably as sand. You understand, Mr. Matthews? Let me see no more individual letters. You know that Mr. Whittemore has full authority to deal with them. May I trouble you to ring? I'm going out." A man appeared very promptly in answer to the bell. "Sniffen, my overcoat," said the philanthropist. "It is, sir," answered Sniffen, helping the thin old man into the great fur folds. "There is no word of the dog, I suppose, Sniffen?" "None, sir. The police was here again yesterday, sir, but they said as 'ow." "The police!" The words were fierce with scorn. 8,000 incompetents. He turned abruptly and went toward the door, where he halted a moment. "Mr. Matthews, since that woman's letter did reach me, I suppose I must pay for my carelessness or yours. Send her what does she say, 4 children? Send her $100, but for my sake send it anonymously. Write her that I pay no attention to such claims," he went on, and Sniffen closed the door behind him. "Takes loosen the little dog 'ard, don't he?" remarked Sniffen sadly to the secretary. "I'm afraid there ain't a chance of finding him now. He ain't been stole, nor he ain't been found, or they'd 'ave brung him back for the reward. He's been knocked on the 'ead like as not. He wasn't much of a dog to look at, you see, just a pup, I'd call him, and after he learned that trick of slipping his collar off, well, I fancy Mr. Carter's seen the last of him. I do indeed." Mr. Carter, meanwhile, was making his way slowly down the snowy avenue, upon his accustomed walk. The walk, however, was dull today, for Skiddles, his little terrier, was not with him to add interest and excitement. Mr. Carter had found Skiddles in the country a year and a half before. Skiddles, then a puppy, was at the time in a most undignified and undesirable position, stuck in a drain tile and unable either to advance or to retreat. Mr. Carter had shoved him forward after a heroic struggle, whereupon Skiddles had licked his hand. Something in the little dog's eye or his action had induced the rich philanthropist to bargain for him and buy him at a cost of $50. Thereafter Skiddles became his daily companion, his chief distraction, and finally the apple of his eye. Skiddle was of no known parentage, hardly of any known breed, but he suited Mr. Carter. What the millionaire reflected with a proud cynicism were his own antecedents, if it came to that. But now Skiddles had disappeared. As Sniffen said, he had learned the trick of slipping free from his collar. One morning the great front doors had been left open for 2 minutes while the hallway was aired. Skiddles must have slipped down the marble steps unseen and dodged round the corner. At all events, he had vanished, and although the whole police force of the city had been roused to secure his return, it was aroused in vain. And for 3 weeks, therefore, a small, straight, white-bearded man in a fur overcoat had walked in mournful irritation alone. He stood upon a corner uncertainly. One way led to the park, and this he usually took. But today he did not want to go to the park. It was too reminiscent of Skiddles. He looked the other way. Down there, if one went far enough, lay slums, and Mr. Carter hated the sight of slums. They always made him miserable and discontented. With all his money and his philanthropy, was there still necessity for such misery in the world? Worse still came the intrusive question at times, had all his money anything to do with the creation of this misery? He owned no tenements. He paid good wages in every factory. He had given sums such as few men have given in the history of philanthropy. Still, there were the slums. However, the worst slums lay some distance off, and he finally turned his back on the park and walked on. It was the day before Christmas. You saw it in people's faces. You saw it in the holly wreaths that hung in windows. You saw it even as you passed the splendid, forbidding houses on the avenue, in the green that here and there banked massive doors. But most of all, you saw it in the shops. Up here the shops were smallish and chiefly of the provision variety, So there was no bewildering display of gifts, but there were Christmas trees everywhere of all sizes. It was astonishing how many people in that neighborhood seemed to favor the old-fashioned idea of a tree. Mr. Carter looked at them with his irritation softening. If they made him feel a trifle more lonely, they allowed him to feel also a trifle less responsible, for after all, it was a fairly happy world. At this moment he perceived a curious phenomenon a short distance before him. Another Christmas tree, but one which moved, apparently of its own volition, along the sidewalk. As Mr. Carter overtook it, he saw that it was borne, or dragged, rather by a small boy who wore a bright red flannel cap and mittens of the same peculiar material. As Mr. Carter looked down at him, he looked up at Mr. Carter and spoke cheerfully. "Going my way, mister?" "Why," said the philanthropist, somewhat taken back, "I was." "Mind dragging this a little way?" asked the boy confidently. "My hands is cold." "Won't you enjoy it more if you manage to take it home by yourself?" "Oh, it ain't for me," said the boy. "Your employer," said the philanthropist severely, "is certainly careless if he allows his trees to be delivered in this fashion." "I ain't delivering it either," said the boy. "This is Bill's tree." "Who's Bill?" "He's a feller with a back that's no good." "Is he your brother?" "No. Take the tree a little way, will you, while I warm myself?" The philanthropist accepted the burden. He did not know why. The boy, released, ran forward, jumped up and down, slapped his red flannel mittens on his legs, and then ran back again. After repeating these maneuvers 2 or 3 times, he returned to where the old gentleman stood holding the tree. "Thanks," he said. "Say, mister, you look like Santa Claus yourself, standing by the tree, with your fur cap and your coat. I bet you don't have to run to keep warm, hey?" There was high admiration in his look. Suddenly his eyes sparkled with an inspiration. "Say, mister," he cried, "will you do something for me? Come into Bill's. He lives only a block from here, and just let him see you. He's only a kid, and he'll think he's seen Santa Claus, sure. We can tell him you're so busy tomorrow you have to go to lots of places today. You won't have to give him anything. We're looking out for all that. Bill got hurt in the summer, and he's been in bed ever since. So we're giving him a Christmas, tree and all. He gets a bunch of things, an air gun and a train that goes round when you wind her up. They're great." "You boys are doing this?" "Well, it's our club at the settlement, and of course Miss Gray thought of it, and she's given Bill the train. Come along, mister." But Mr. Carter declined. "All right," said the boy. "I guess, what with Pete and all, Bill will have Christmas enough." "Who's Pete?" "Bill's dog. He's had him 3 weeks now. Best little pup you ever saw." A dog which Bill had had 3 weeks, and in a neighbourhood not a quarter of a mile from the avenue. It was 3 weeks since Skiddles had disappeared. That this dog was Skiddles was of course most improbable, and yet the philanthropist was ready to grasp at any clue which might lead to the lost terrier. "How did Bill get this dog?" he demanded. "I found him myself. Some kids had tin-canned him, and he came into our entry. He licked my hand and then sat up on his hind legs. Somebody taught him that, you know. I thought right away, here's a dog for Bill, and I took him over there and fed him, and they kept him in Bill's room 2 or 3 days so he shouldn't get scared again and run off. And now he wouldn't leave Bill for anybody. Of course, he ain't much of a dog. Pete ain't," he added. "He's just a pup, but he's mighty friendly." "Boys," said Mr. Carter, "I guess I'll just go round and—" He was about to add, "have a look at that dog," but fearful of raising suspicion, he ended, "and see Bill." The tenements to which the boy led him were of brick and reasonably clean. Nearly every window showed some sign of Christmas. The tree bearer led the way into a dark hall, up one flight, Mr. Carter assisting with the tree, and down another dark hall to a door, on which he knocked. A woman opened it. "Here's the tree," said the boy in a loud whisper. "Is Bill's door shut?" Mr. Carter stepped forward out of the darkness. "I beg your pardon, madam," he said. "I met this young man in the street, and he asked me to come here and see a playmate of his, who is, I understand, an invalid. But if I'm intruding—" "Come in," said the woman heartily, throwing the door open. "Bill will be glad to see you, sir." The philanthropist stepped inside. The room was decently furnished and clean. There was a sewing machine in the corner, and in both the windows hung wreaths of holly. Between the windows was a clear space where evidently the tree, when decorated, was to stand. "Are all the things here?" eagerly demanded the tree bearer. "They're all here, Jimmy," answered Mrs. Bailey. "The candy just came." "Say," cried the boy, pulling off his red flannel mittens to blow on his fingers, "won't it be great? But now Bill's got to see Santa Claus. I'll just go in and tell him, and then when I holler, mister, you come on and pretend you're Santa Claus." And with incredible celerity the boy opened the door at the opposite end of the room and disappeared. "Madam," said Mr. Carter, in considerable embarrassment, "I must say one word. I am Mr. Carter, Mr. Allen Carter. You may have heard of my name?" She shook her head. "No, sir." "I live not far from here on the avenue. 3 weeks ago I lost a little dog that I valued very much. I have had all the city searched since then, in vain. Today I met the boy who has just left us. He informed me that 3 weeks ago he found a dog which is at present in the possession of your son. I wonder, is it not just possible that this dog may be mine?" Mrs. Bailey smiled. "I guess not, Mr. Carter. The dog Jimmy found hadn't come off the avenue, not from the look of him. You know there's hundreds and hundreds of dogs without homes, sir, but I will say for this one he has a kind of way with him." "Hark!" said Mr. Carter. There was a rustling and a snuffing at the door at the far end of the room, a quick scratching of feet. Then woof, woof, woof! Sharp and clear came happy, impatient little barks. The philanthropist's eyes brightened. "Yes," he said, "that is the dog." "I doubt if it can be, sir," said Mrs. Bailey deprecatingly. "Open the door, please," commanded the philanthropist, "and let us see." Mrs. Bailey complied. There was a quick jump, a tumbling rush, and Skiddles, the lost Skiddles, was in the philanthropist's arms. Mrs. Bailey shut the door with a troubled face. "I see it's your dog, sir," she said, "but I hope you won't be thinking that Jimmy or I—" "Madam," interrupted Mr. Carter, "I would not be so foolish. On the contrary, I owe you 1,000 thanks." Mrs. Bailey looked more cheerful. "Poor little Billy," she said. "It'll come hard on him, losing Pete just at Christmas time. But the boys are so good to him, I dare say he'll forget it." "Who are these boys?" inquired the philanthropist. "Isn't their action somewhat unusual?" "It's Miss Gray's club at the settlement, sir," explained Mrs. Bailey. "Every Christmas they do this for somebody. It's not charity. Billy and I don't need charity, or take it. It's just friendliness. They're good boys." "I see," said the philanthropist. He was still wondering about it, though, when the door opened again and Jimmy thrust out a face shining with anticipation. "All ready, mister," he said. "Bill's waiting for you." "Jimmy," began Mrs. Bailey, about to explain. "The gentleman—" But the philanthropist held up his hand, interrupting her. "You'll let me see your son, Mrs. Bailey?" he asked gently. "Yes, certainly, sir." Mr. Carter put Skiddles down and walked slowly into the inner room. The bed stood with its side toward him. On it lay a small boy of 7, rigid of body, but with his arms free and his face lighted with joy. "Hello, Santa Claus," he piped, in a voice shrill with excitement. "Hello, Bill," answered the philanthropist sedately. The boy turned his eyes on Jimmy. "He knows my name," he said with glee. "He knows everybody's name," said Jimmy. "Now you tell him what you want, Bill, and he'll bring it tomorrow." "How would you like," said the philanthropist reflectively, and he hesitated. It seemed so incongruous with that stiff figure on the bed. "An air gun?" "I guess yes," said Bill happily. "And a train of cars," broke in the impatient Jimmy, "that goes like 60 when you wind her." "Hi," said Bill. The philanthropist solemnly made notes of this. "How about," he remarked inquiringly, "a tree?" "Honest?" said Bill. "I think it can be managed," said Santa Claus. He advanced to the bedside. "I'm glad to have seen you, Bill. You know how busy I am, but I hope to see you again." "Not till next year, of course," warned Jimmy. "Not till then, of course," assented Santa Claus. "And now, good bye." "You forgot to ask him if he'd been a good boy," suggested Jimmy. "I have," said Bill. "I've been fine. You ask Mother. She gives you both a high character," said Santa Claus. "Good bye again." And so saying, he withdrew. Skiddles followed him out. The philanthropist closed the door of the bedroom and then turned to Mrs. Bailey. She was regarding him with awestruck eyes. "Oh, sir," she said, I know now who you are, the Mr. Carter that gives so much away to people." The philanthropist nodded deprecatingly. "Just so, Mrs. Bailey," he said. "And there is one gift, or loan rather, which I should like to make to you. I should like to leave the little dog with you till after the holidays. I'm afraid I'll have to claim him then, but if you'll keep him till after Christmas and let me find perhaps another dog for Billy, I shall be much obliged." Again the door of the bedroom opened, and Jimmy emerged quietly. "Bill wants the pup," he explained. "Pete, Pete," came the piping but happy voice from the inner room. Skiddles hesitated. Mr. Carter made no sign. "Pete, Pete," shrilled the voice again. Slowly, very slowly, Skiddles turned and went back into the bedroom. "You see," said Mr. Carter, smiling, "he won't be too unhappy away from me, Mrs. Bailey." On his way home the philanthropist saw even more evidence of Christmas gaiety along the streets than before. He stepped out briskly. In spite of his 68 years, he even hummed a little tune. When he reached the house on the avenue, he found his secretary still at work. "Oh, by the way, Mr. Matthews," he said, "did you send that letter to the woman saying I never paid attention to personal appeals?" "No." "Then write her, please, enclosing my check for $200, and wish her a very Merry Christmas in my name, will you? And hereafter will you always let me see such letters as that one? Of course, after careful investigation. I fancy perhaps I may have been too rigid in the past." "Certainly, sir," answered the bewildered secretary. He began fumbling excitedly for his notebook. "I found the little dog," continued the philanthropist. "You will be glad to know that." "You have found him?" cried the secretary. "Have you got him back, Mr. Carter? Where was he?" "He was detained on Oak Street, I believe," said the philanthropist. "No, I have not got him back yet. I have left him with a young boy till after the holidays." He settled himself to his papers, for philanthropists must toil even on the 24th of December. But the secretary shook his head in a daze. "I wonder what's happened," he said to himself. End of The Philanthropist's Christmas by James Weber Lynn. Recording by Elisa McCaslin.
Briefly, before we play our last piece of audio, if you've enjoyed the 12 Days Before Christmas, please continue listening to CraftLit. If you're using a smart device, you can download the dedicated CraftLit app for iOS, Android, or Windows from their stores. Or you can listen at craftlit.com. You can like us on Facebook and listen there. Rate and review us on iTunes. Support us on Patreon. But most of all, keep listening to great books. And have a very, very Merry Christmas.
'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave the lustre of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. "Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all." As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes how they twinkled, his dimples how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
Away in a manger, no crib for a bed, the little Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head. The stars in the bright sky looked down where he lay, the little Lord Jesus asleep on the hay. The cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, but little Lord Jesus no crying he makes. I love thee, Lord Jesus, look down from the sky and stay by my cradle till morning is nigh. Be near me, Lord Jesus, I ask thee to stay close by me forever and love me, I pray. Bless all the dear children in thy tender care, and fit us for heaven to live with thee.